So today I'm going to be presenting on a very interesting topic of how immunotherapy made an entry into the treatment of unresectable stage 3 non-small cell lung cancer with the PACIFIC trial. Here are my disclosures. So today, I'm just briefly going to be talking about immunotherapy and treatment of non-small cell lung cancer with an overview of the PACIFIC trial and special focus on what are we doing now in clinic once the PACIFIC trial has been approved for treatment. So we all know that approximately 1/3 of patients with non-small cell lung cancer are diagnosed with stage 3, despite offering them treatment that is theoretically with a curative intent. The 5-year survival is dismal after concurrent chemoradiation for unresectable disease, with a survival of around 13 to 26%. Before the PACIFIC trial, there had been many interventions, many trials that tried adding additional vaccines or targeted therapy in an unselected population of patients after concurrent chemoradiation that failed to show any survival advantage. That brings me to immunotherapy in lung cancer. We all know that immune checkpoint inhibitors have really changed the landscape of treatment of advanced non-small cell lung cancer, with many FDA approvals uh, due to survival advantage over the last 5 years. The rationale for really combining immune checkpoint inhibitors with radiation in an unresectable stage 3 setting stems from the inherent immunomodulatory property of radiation that and its effect on the tumor microenvironment, which works synergistically with immune checkpoint inhibitor. So we know that radiation can lead to increased antigen release, upregulation of PD-L1 and other immunomodulatory cell molecules, which in turn actually has a capability of converting an immunotherapy refractory tumor to an immunotherapy responsive tumor. Um, Durvalumab is the immunotherapy which is used in patients with stage 3 non-small cell lung cancer. And I just wanted to discuss that a little bit more. It's a selective high affinity IgG1 monoclonal antibody that basically blocks the PD-L1 ligand on the tumor cell and really blocks its binding to PD-1 on T cells, which leads to stimulation of these cytotoxic T cells to recognize and ultimately kill the tumor. Coming to the PACIFIC trial, so this was really a practice-changing trial for us. It was a phase 3 global placebo-controlled, blinded, randomized control trial that looked at patients with unresectable stage 3 non-small cell lung cancer that did not show any progression of disease after concurrent platinum-based chemotherapy. Patients were enrolled irrespective of PD-L1 status, and in fact, knowing the PD-L1 status was not required at the time of enrollment. Then the patients were randomized in a 2:1 fashion to receive durvalumab at 10 milligram per kg every 2 weeks for up to 12 months or placebo. The co-primary endpoints of the study were progression-free survival and overall survival. So the results initially were reported in 2017 that showed a pretty significant impact of 12 months of durvalumab on the progression-free survival. After a median follow-up around 14 months, patients who received durvalumab had a median PFS of 16.8 months compared to placebo, which was 5.6 months with a hazard ratio of 0.52. We can see that there was an early separation of curves that remained separated. And based on this really compelling data, FDA approved treatment of durvalumab after concurrent chemoradiation in the United States. It wasn't surprising that actually the improvement in progression-free survival did translate into an improvement in overall survival. And here I'm presenting the 3-year overall survival data, which was presented by my mentor, Dr. Gray, at ASCO in 2020. And here we see that 3-year overall survival with durvalumab was 57% compared to 43% with placebo. The other interesting part about the PACIFIC trial was the key secondary endpoints, which I believe were pretty clinically relevant. So when the authors looked at time to death or distant metastasis in the intention to treat population, durvalumab again had a benefit with an improvement in time to death and distant metastasis to about 28.3 months compared to 16 months in the placebo arm. What was interesting is when the authors looked at the specific incidence of new lesions at the time of relapse, there was in fact a decrease in incidence of brain disease at the time of relapse, which was 11.8% in the placebo arm compared to 6.3% in the durvalumab arm. The PACIFIC trial did have a pretty robust profile of pre-specified subgroup analysis. And here you can see it's a forest plot that showed that there was benefit really seen across the board, except for a few exceptions. I would just like to discuss the two subgroups of most clinical importance here. So when the authors looked at patients who had known EGFR mutation, the benefit was really uncertain, but it's important to note here that the EGFR testing is not required in stage 3 lung cancer. It's no surprise that actually very few patients had an EGFR status known in this trial. And that's why it's very difficult to make any strong clinical interpretations from this. But if we learn from the data in the metastatic setting, we know that immunotherapy as a single agent doesn't really work for this population of patients. So it's definitely something that's hypothesis generating. The other thing which was interesting is the efficacy also was dependent on the time of randomization. So this trial, really, the start point of this trial was after concurrent chemoradiation. And the authors saw that if they randomized patients to durvalumab, within 14 days of completing concurrent chemoradiation, they seem to do well compared to those patients who were randomized after 14 days. Again, this can be completely confounded by the fact that, in fact, the people who can be enrolled into the durvalumab arm within 14 days were probably the ones who were the healthiest and did not have any side effects from concurrent chemoradiation. A subgroup analysis in PACIFIC trial, which was kind of interesting and also very controversial, was the subgroup analysis of the PDL1 expression. Again, this trial did not mandate PDL1 testing as an accrual criteria. And the pre-specified subgroup analysis was a PDL1 of greater than 25% or less than 25%. However, on request of the regulatory authorities from Europe, the authors conducted a post hoc exploratory analysis in which they looked at PDL1 expression of less than 1% and more than 1%. And to note here that PDL1 was only evaluable in like 63% of patients. So the authors found that there's actually no significant efficacy of durvalumab in the population of patients that was PDL1 negative. Again, this is hypothesis generating. This has definitely impacted the guidelines in Europe, but has not impacted the guidelines for us in United States, where durvalumab is approved irrespective of the PDL1 status. Now, coming to the toxicity, it's a very important topic because we are committing somebody to 12 additional months of therapy after they receive probably what I think is the most difficult treatment in non-small cell lung cancer. When we looked at the toxicity data from the PACIFIC trial after a median follow-up of 25.2 months in the second interim analysis, it was noted that grade 3 or 4 adverse events were seen in around 30% of patients in the durvalumab arm, which was pretty comparable to 26.1% in patients with the placebo arm. Discontinuation of trials due to adverse events was seen in 15% of patients in the durvalumab arm, compared to 9.8% in the placebo arm. Coming to the adverse events of like real importance, which is immune-mediated adverse events, as expected, immune-mediated adverse events were more common in patients in the durvalumab arm compared to placebo arm. I think one of the most feared side effects when you are committing somebody to immunotherapy after radiation is pneumonitis. And we did see that, in fact, 1/3 of patients in the durvalumab arm had any grade pneumonitis compared to 24% in the placebo group. In my clinical practice, I think this figure holds true. I do see 1/3 of patients really getting some kind of pneumonitis. However, it's usually grade 1 and 2. It just resolves with like sometimes drug hold and a short and a taper of steroids. Um, it's important to know that the non-pneumonitis immune-mediated adverse events were actually not that serious. It was mainly just thyroid dysfunction or dermatitis, which are very easily manageable clinically. Now, really coming to the crux of the topic here is like, how does specific trial translate into me treating a patient in the clinic? I think as
Shabnam, sorry,
anything,
we have few minutes left, please.
okay. Yep. As anything in oncology, I think it really depends on the risk and benefit ratio. For me, the points that go in favor of the Pacific trial was it was a global study that showed an overall survival benefit in a curative intent treatment. It did show a decrease in incidence of CNS relapse with really no detrimental effect on patient-reported outcomes. Uh, the things that go against the study was it was a heterogeneous study population, and actually PET CT, which is a pretty standard staging procedure, was not required as part of accrual. So we don't know if we were treating micrometastatic disease. The subgroup analysis interpretation is definitely challenging. And then we come to the practical challenges related to duration of therapy, access, cost, and risk of toxicity. So what have we done to solve these practical problems at our Cancer Institute at Huntsman? So we have many patient assistance programs that help with financial assistance for patients whose insurance doesn't cover durvalumab. And now in the COVID era, we are transitioning to durvalumab every 4-week dosing, which we took from the Caspian trial, and it does get approved for majority of our patients. But in future, I think we really need to know that do we need the 12 months of treatment, or we can go by with the same survival benefit with a shorter treatment? And do we really need that whole 12 months of consolidation? Can we just get away with neoadjuvant immunotherapy or concurrent immunotherapy? So I think in conclusion, to answer the question, did Pacific trial change the practice? I think absolutely it did, because the trial outcome data is pretty compelling with a survival advantage in a population that did not see an improvement in survival for many years. There are definitely challenges with interpretation of the subgroup analysis and challenges in real world patients. I think one population that stands out to me is the driver mutation driven population that historically does not respond well to immunotherapy. With this, I would like to thank the organizers